In the quiet darkness of the night, we begin a gentle journey through the story of Nike. Under a canopy of stars, we turn back time to the beginning, when this global symbol of athletic inspiration was just a fragile dream, a faint spark on the horizon. It started with two men and a simple idea, a quest to make better running shoes. The company we now know as Nike was born from humble beginnings, named after the winged goddess of victory, and its earliest steps were taken in the soft Oregon twilight. This is a tale of creativity and perseverance, told softly like a breeze weaving through the trees, guiding us from a tiny startup to a worldwide icon. Long ago, in the early 1960s, a young runner named Phil Knight jogged along moonlit tracks in Oregon, his footsteps steady and hopeful. Beside him stood his coach, Bill Bowerman, a wise mentor with a relentless, inventive spirit. Often, in the pre-dawn mist or under the late evening sky, the two would talk about their dream, a new kind of running shoe, lighter and more attuned to the needs of athletes. At the time, sports shoes were plain and heavy, but in Knight's quiet determination and Bowerman's tinkering mind, there flickered a vision of something better. Their midnight conversations echoed with possibility, each idea as gentle as dew forming on the morning grass. Knight and Bowerman officially formed their little company on a cool winter day in 1964, calling it Blue Ribbon Sports. In those days, there was no fanfare or fame, only a small operation selling running shoes from the trunk of a car at local track meets. We can imagine Phil Knight at dusk, raising the hatchback of his old car to reveal boxes of shoes as the crisp evening air settles around the track. Athletes would stop by, drawn by Bowerman's reputation and Knight's passion, to try on these new shoes. Each sale was a tiny victory, a seed of confidence planting itself quietly in the soil of their fledgling business. The world around them was vast and still at this midnight hour of Nike's history. They did not yet call the company Nike, not yet brandishing the famous swoosh, but the spirit of victory was already taking shape. In those first steps, on those gentle Oregon evenings, the foundation was laid. A company rooted in a love of sport and a fearless urge to innovate was beginning to stretch its wings, like a young bird preparing for its first flight. Our journey with Nike has only just begun, and already the night is whispering of big dreams to come. And so, beneath the same night sky that once watched over Phil and Bill as they chased their vision, we follow in their gentle footsteps, ready to explore the next chapters of Nike's unfolding tale under these quiet stars. As the 1960s rolled on, Blue Ribbon Sports found its footing slowly but surely. Phil Knight struck a deal across the ocean, bringing in quality running shoes from a Japanese company to sell in America. Each shipment that arrived felt like a small treasure trove. Knight would carefully unpack boxes of shoes, sleek and light, and he and Bowerman sold them one by one to enthusiastic runners. Word spread softly through the track community about these new shoes, and the passionate young company behind them. By the middle of the decade, their sales had grown, and before long, they opened their first retail store in Santa Monica, California. The shop was modest, just a little space with a simple sign. Sunlight and ocean air poured in as customers stepped on creaking wooden floors. To Bowerman and Knight, it felt like a sanctuary of running, a place where dreams of faster feet took shape among shelves of shoes. Not long after, the business expanded farther, reaching new customers with the same personal touch and quiet excitement. In those early years, Bowerman was not content to simply sell others' designs. In the quiet of his workshop, late at night or before dawn, he would tinker with sneakers like a curious inventor. He ripped apart soles and stitched new ideas into them, always chasing a shoe that would let athletes run freer and faster. His workbench often lay strewn with rubber shavings, glue, and fabric scraps, quiet evidence of hours spent trying one idea after another. Sometimes he tested his homemade prototypes on his University of Oregon runners. One of his top protégés, Steve Prefontaine, became an early believer, a spirited young distance runner who laced up Bowerman's special shoes and ran with all his heart. Bowerman's experiments did not always work, but each attempt glowed with insight. Every failure was just another lesson, another iteration on the path toward something groundbreaking. By the late 60s, the young company had a quickening heartbeat. What began as trunk sales turned into steady storefront business, and athletes felt a kinship with this homegrown brand. There was warmth in their approach, a personal connection with every customer, a sense that Bowerman and Knight truly understood a runner's soul. Under the fading light of each day, as the store's shutters closed, Bowerman would still be dreaming up improvements, sketching ideas by lamplight. A breakthrough was hovering on the horizon, like the first hint of sunrise after a long night. The stage was set for a moment of inspiration that would soon change everything. One crisp morning in 1971, Bill Bowerman sat at breakfast with his wife, enjoying the quiet start of the day. As sunlight slanted through the kitchen window, his eyes fell upon the open waffle iron on the table. In that unassuming grid of squares, he suddenly saw the answer to a problem that had been on his mind for years. Bowerman had been searching for a shoe sole that could provide excellent grip without the weight and stiffness of metal spikes. In a burst of inspiration, he hurried to his workshop, grabbed some liquid rubber, and carefully poured it into the waffle iron's honeycomb pattern. The first attempt glued the waffle maker shut, but Bowerman was undeterred. He obtained another waffle iron and refined his process, adjusting the rubber mix and molds until the design was just right. What emerged was a revolutionary waffle-soled shoe, a prototype so light and grippy that it felt like a revelation. He handed out early pairs to athletes, and the curious tread left impressions that reminded people of strange, otherworldly footprints. Someone nicknamed the early model the Moon Shoe, and the name stuck, a quiet wink at how far a simple kitchen idea could travel. The waffle sole proved to be a game changer. With its nubby grid pattern providing traction and cushioning, runners could move with newfound confidence and speed. Coaches and athletes marveled at how a sole so light could grip the track so firmly as if the shoe were an extension of the foot itself, gently hugging the ground with each stride. Bowerman's breakfast table idea blossomed into something magical, an innovation that would propel the young company to new heights. After more refinement, the first waffle trainers were released to the public, and they became a success. Athletes loved the feeling of running on springy rubber, and the little brand gained momentum. No longer just a distributor of others' footwear, Bowerman and Knight's venture had birthed something uniquely its own. In every pair, there was a hint of Bowerman's kitchen experiment, a quiet reminder that big breakthroughs can grow from ordinary moments. Under the gently rising sun of the early 1970s, the company was beginning to stride ahead boldly on the strength of this waffle-soled wonder. By the early 1970s, Blue Ribbon Sports stood at a gentle crossroads. The partnership with its early supplier was fading, and the small company was ready to chart its own path. Though saying goodbye to that first chapter was daunting, it was also liberating. They decided to rename themselves after the Greek goddess of victory, choosing the name Nike as a symbol of triumph and speed. The decision felt like a brave step into the unknown, as if a fledgling bird spreading its wings to fly on its own. Under this new name, the company's identity began to shine. The word Nike carried a whisper of ancient strength and swiftness, an enduring promise that every athlete wearing their shoes could feel a bit of that victory spirit. A brand new symbol was crafted to accompany the name. Phil Knight knew they needed a logo as striking as a wing beat, something simple yet full of motion. A young design student named Carolyn Davidson was enlisted to create it. She sketched a slender curved mark, later known as the swoosh, meant to convey movement and speed. In its sweep, one could almost see a wing or a swift breeze. It was as if the very idea of flight and victory had been captured in a single brushstroke. When Knight and Bowerman first saw it, they weren't entirely sure what to make of it, but the symbol had a quiet energy, a sense of momentum frozen in mid-air. They decided to trust it. With a new name and a new logo, Nike became a real company with its own voice. The timing was perfect. Bowerman's waffle-soled designs, now adorned with the swoosh, were ready to meet the world. At major track meets and Olympic trials, athletes began to wear shoes marked with that small curved sign. Many spectators had never heard the name before, but the sight of swift runners and the swoosh flashing by left an impression. In the months and years that followed, the Nike brand began to take root. The little company from Oregon had given itself wings, and with each passing season it flew a bit farther and a bit faster, guided by the spirit of victory its new name embodied. As the years went by after the Nike name was born, the company's growth gathered pace like a runner finding their stride. Through the mid-1970s, Nike became a familiar friend to athletes on tracks and fields across America. The waffle-soled running shoes won races and hearts, and the Nike name began quietly spreading beyond Oregon. Charismatic athletes embraced the young brand. Nike's early endorsements carried the swoosh into new sports and new places, expanding the company's reach and confidence. On the home front, Steve Prefontaine ran with a bold, fearless spirit while wearing Nike shoes, embodying the brand's appetite for effort and courage. With each competition and each victory, the mystique around Nike deepened. Athletes felt that the company truly understood their passion, and in return, Nike drew inspiration from the athletes' drive. It was shared energy, a mutual belief in pushing limits gently, steadily, one step at a time. By the late 1970s, the company that had started in a car trunk and a kitchen was blossoming into a force in the athletic world. Nike expanded its lineup from running into other sports, making basketball shoes, tennis shoes, and more, applying the same creative spark to every new design. The swoosh logo gained recognition with each passing season. The company's leadership fostered an atmosphere of innovation and camaraderie. Employees, many of them former athletes, worked with a sense of mission, as if they were crafting wings for anyone who dared to chase a dream. Around this time, Nike began shaping its voice in a deeper way. It experimented with advertising that felt more like philosophy than sales. One early message captured the mood: there is no finish line. The idea resonated with runners and everyday people alike. It suggested the journey matters, that personal growth is an open road, not a single destination. By the start of the 1980s, Nike was no longer just an upstart. It was a leader in the making, poised to take a bold leap onto a global stage, confident, inventive, and still hungry in the most peaceful way. Hungry to build, to improve, to keep moving forward. The dawn of the 1980s marked a new chapter for Nike, one of validation and transformation. Nike went public, offering its shares on the stock market for the first time. This step meant the little company from Oregon was now owned by many hands, athletes, fans, and investors alike, all believing in its future. It was more than a financial event. It felt symbolic, as if Nike were planting its flag atop a hill it had long been climbing. Phil Knight and Bill Bowerman, who had started with a small sum and a simple agreement, watched their creation enter a bigger arena with quiet pride. Yet success did not lull Nike to sleep. The early 1980s brought new challenges and opportunities. Fitness culture widened beyond jogging into aerobics, basketball, and everyday training. Nike pushed forward with innovation. The company introduced a new kind of cushioning, tiny pockets of pressurized gas embedded in the sole, a technology that would become known as Nike Air. It offered a soft, springy feeling, absorbing impact and returning energy. For many athletes, it felt like the ground itself had become kinder. Nike's leadership believed that with the right innovations and the right athletes, the brand could become something far larger than a running company. Designers began creating bolder basketball shoes, thinking carefully about support, comfort, and style. The company worked patiently, aware that breakthroughs do not always arrive on demand. Sometimes they arrive like a quiet change in the wind. And as the mid-1980s approached, a sense of anticipation hung in the air. Nike had a strong brand, a growing global presence, and a willingness to bet on creativity. It only needed a catalyst, a partnership that could fuse performance with imagination. Somewhere, a young athlete was about to rise, ready to leap, and Nike was ready to meet him in midair. In 1984, the spark Nike had been waiting for arrived, not as a gimmick or a technology, but in the form of a young athlete with extraordinary talent. Michael Jordan was a rising star in basketball, a player whose leaps and fierce elegance captivated fans. When Nike signed the rookie Jordan, it was a bold move for a company still carving space in the basketball world, but it would prove to be one of the most defining partnerships in modern sport. Nike created a signature shoe for him, the Air Jordan, blending Nike's air cushioning with Jordan's soaring persona. The first Air Jordans arrived with a striking look that stood out on the court and in the crowd. As Jordan rose above defenders, hanging in the air for a breath longer than seemed possible, his shoes became symbols of that dream of flight. Night after night, he delivered moments that turned into shared memory, the kind that lives in highlight reels and childhood imaginations. Young fans wanted more than a shoe. They wanted a piece of the feeling, the confidence, the possibility. The Air Jordan line did more than drive sales. It changed how people thought about sneakers. Shoes were no longer only equipment. They became identity. They became a kind of language, a way to say who you were or who you hoped to be. Nike's swoosh, once familiar mostly to runners, now flashed in gymnasiums and city streets, in music and culture, on posters and backpacks. A bridge formed between sport and style, and Nike found itself walking across it with calm certainty. With Michael Jordan, Nike's story gained a new kind of lift. The brand became bolder without losing its roots. It still believed in hard work and quiet improvement, but now it also understood the power of myth, of storytelling, of a single athlete making the impossible feel close enough to touch. And as this chapter settled into place, Nike prepared to distill its philosophy into a new message. 3 simple words that would soon echo around the world, soft and steady, like a heartbeat in the dark. By the late 1980s, Nike was ready to distill its philosophy into something simple and enduring. After years of innovation, risk, and belief, the company found the words that captured its spirit. Just do it. 3 short words, calm and direct, carrying an unusual depth. They did not shout. They did not explain. They simply invited action. The phrase first appeared quietly, paired not with a superstar, but with an older man jogging steadily across a bridge. His pace was slow and unremarkable, yet deeply human. The message felt universal. You did not need to be fast. You did not need to be young. You only needed to begin. In that moment, Nike spoke not just to athletes, but to anyone standing at the edge of effort, unsure, hesitant, but willing. Just do it became a kind of soft command, repeated across billboards and screens, across cities and continents. It did not tell people what to do. It reminded them that they already knew. The words settled into culture like a steady rhythm, encouraging movement in small personal ways. A first jog, a return after injury, a quiet decision to keep going. For Nike, the phrase marked a shift. The brand was no longer only about performance. It was about mindset, about choosing action over hesitation. In the calm repetition of those 3 words, Nike found a voice that felt both motivating and strangely reassuring. And as the decade came to a close, that voice carried the company forward into a larger, more connected world. The 1990s opened like a wide horizon. Nike stepped into the decade with confidence, yet remained restless, always searching for new ground. Having reshaped running and basketball, the company turned its attention outward, expanding deeper into global sport. Football pitches, tennis courts, training fields, and stadiums across the world began to reflect the quiet spread of the swoosh. Nike's approach remained consistent. It partnered with athletes not only for their success, but for their individuality. Some were bold and expressive, others were calm and disciplined. Together, they formed a mosaic of excellence. Each athlete carried their own story, and Nike allowed those stories to breathe, to resonate naturally. This was also a decade of cultural presence. Nike apparel appeared not only in competition, but in daily life. On city streets and schoolyards, in music videos and casual wear, the brand blended into the rhythm of everyday movement. Sportswear became lifestyle, and Nike understood that people wanted clothing that moved with them, not just during training, but through life. Behind the scenes, the company continued refining its craft. Designers studied motion, engineers explored materials, marketers listened carefully to how people responded to the brand's voice. Growth came not from noise, but from consistency. Nike remained focused on a simple idea. That effort, expressed honestly, would always find an audience. As the decade unfolded, Nike became less a company and more a companion. Present during moments of competition, yes, but also during quiet mornings, long walks, solitary workouts. The swoosh did not demand attention. It simply kept pace. As the world moved toward a new millennium, Nike adapted with calm intention. Technology was changing how people lived, worked, and trained, and Nike leaned into that shift without losing its human center. The brand began exploring how data, design, and connection could enhance movement, not replace it. Runners started tracking their miles digitally. Athletes compared progress across cities and continents. Nike embraced this emerging world, helping people see their effort in new ways. Numbers became encouragement. Progress became visible. Yet the heart of it remained unchanged. Movement, breath, repetition. At the same time, Nike's roster of athletes evolved. A new generation rose, carrying the torch with their own style and presence. Basketball entered another golden era. Tennis showcased strength and precision. Football dazzled with creativity. Nike did not try to control these narratives. It framed them gently, letting authenticity lead. This period was not about reinvention. It was about continuity. Nike stayed grounded in the belief that innovation should feel natural. Shoes became lighter. Apparel became more responsive. Every change was meant to disappear beneath the experience, leaving only the feeling of motion. As screens grew brighter and the world faster, Nike remained steady. It did not rush. It did not chase every trend. Instead, it focused on helping people move through a changing world with confidence and ease. In more recent years, Nike's story has softened into something reflective. The urgency of early growth has given way to balance. The company still innovates, still experiments, still leads, but with a deeper awareness of longevity. Movement, after all, is not about speed alone. It is about sustainability. Nike's designs began to emphasize efficiency and simplicity. Materials were reconsidered, processes refined. The goal was not excess, but harmony between performance and responsibility, between ambition and care. This evolution mirrored the journey of many athletes themselves, who learn over time that endurance matters more than intensity. The brand's message also matured. Where once it shouted encouragement from billboards, it now often spoke in quieter tones. Campaigns focused on resilience, inclusion, and personal progress. Victory was no longer only measured in trophies, but in commitment, showing up again and again. At its headquarters, the atmosphere reflected this calm confidence, a campus shaped by sport, creativity, and reflection. Statues and names honored the past, while open spaces invited future ideas. The spirit of Bowerman and Knight still lingered, not as force, but as presence. Nike had become something rare, a global company that still remembered how it started, with questions, experiments, and belief. As Nike moved deeper into the new century, its story became less about explosive growth and more about rhythm. The brand had learned something essential over time, that endurance matters more than acceleration. Just as athletes pace themselves for a long race, Nike began thinking in longer arcs. Innovation was no longer about dramatic leaps alone, but about refinement, repetition, and quiet improvement. Design teams studied how bodies move over hours, not minutes, how fabric rests against skin, how shoes respond not only at top speed, but at the end of a long day. The goal was to create products that disappeared into experience. Shoes you forgot you were wearing, apparel that moved so naturally it felt like part of you. This philosophy reflected maturity, not slowdown. It was the confidence of a company that no longer needed to prove it belonged. Nike's business also evolved with this mindset. The company invested deeply in direct relationships with customers, building digital platforms that allowed people to engage on their own terms. Runners tracked progress. Athletes shared milestones. Small victories were recorded and remembered. Movement became measurable, but not cold. Data was used gently, as encouragement rather than pressure. Throughout this period, Nike continued partnering with athletes across generations. Some were global icons, others were rising talents, still finding their voice. Nike understood that greatness has many forms. It can be loud or quiet, flashy or disciplined. What mattered was commitment, the willingness to return each day and do the work. As markets shifted and competition intensified, Nike remained steady. It did not chase every moment. Instead, it trusted its long-held belief that authenticity compounds over time. Like training, progress came from consistency, and so Nike continued forward, calm, deliberate, and deeply grounded in motion. In recent years, Nike's presence has felt almost ambient. It is everywhere, yet rarely intrusive. A familiar shape on a shoe by the door, a jacket pulled on before an early walk, a quiet reminder that movement does not need ceremony, it only needs intention. The company's messaging softened further, turning inward toward ideas of resilience and personal balance. Campaigns spoke less about winning and more about returning. Returning after loss. Returning after rest. Returning after doubt. This shift mirrored how many people experience sport later in life. Not as competition, but as connection. A way to stay present in one's body. A way to breathe. Nike's headquarters reflected this same energy. A place shaped by history, yet open and fluid. Buildings named after athletes. Paths designed for walking meetings. Quiet corners where ideas could form slowly. It was no longer just a company campus. It was a landscape shaped by movement and thought. Phil Knight's presence lingered here like an echo rather than a command. His philosophy, patient, observant, willing to bet on people, had become embedded in the culture. Bill Bowerman's influence remained too, in the relentless curiosity that still defined product creation. The waffle iron was no longer needed, but the mindset it represented endured. Nike had reached a rare place. It was both global and personal, scaled and intimate. A brand that could sit quietly in the background of someone's life and still matter deeply, not because it demanded attention, but because it understood rhythm. And in understanding rhythm, it understood people. As Nike moved further into the present, its relationship with time changed. In the early years, everything had felt urgent. Shipments to unload, bills to pay, ideas to test before someone else tried them first. Now, time felt wider. Decisions were made with patience. Strategies unfolded over seasons rather than quarters. The company had learned that lasting relevance comes from listening as much as leading. Inside Nike's design studios, the atmosphere reflected this maturity. There was less noise, more focus. Designers watched how people actually moved through their days, not just athletes in competition, but commuters walking to work, parents lifting children, older runners returning carefully to familiar routes. Movement, Nike realized, is not always dramatic. Often it is subtle, repetitive, and deeply personal. Shoes were shaped around this understanding, cushioning softened where fatigue sets in, uppers flexed where feet swell over long hours, apparel adapted to temperature, to sweat, to stillness as much as speed. Every decision asks the same quiet question. Does this make movement feel easier, more natural, more sustainable? From a business perspective, Nike leaned into focus. Rather than trying to be everything everywhere, it refined how and where it connected with people. Digital platforms became places of encouragement rather than pressure. The language softened. Progress was framed as something earned gradually, not demanded instantly. This era was not about spectacle, it was about trust. Trust that if Nike continued to serve the rhythm of real movement, people would continue to invite the brand into their lives, not loudly, not obsessively, but consistently, like a familiar path walked again and again, each step reinforcing the last. At the same time, Nike's understanding of athletes continued to evolve. The company no longer saw greatness as a single peak, but as a long curve, rising, leveling, dipping, and rising again. Athletes trained differently now. Recovery mattered. Longevity mattered. Nike listened closely to these shifts, shaping products and messaging that respected the full arc of a career. Young athletes were encouraged not only to chase excellence, but to protect it. Shoes emphasized balance as much as speed. Apparel supported rest as thoughtfully as exertion. This philosophy echoed Bill Bowerman's earliest instincts, that the body is not a machine to be forced, but a system to be understood. Nike's storytelling followed this same arc. Campaigns began to celebrate persistence over dominance, the quiet courage of returning after injury, the discipline of showing up when motivation fades. These stories resonated deeply because they mirrored real life. Not every day is a race. Some days are simply about putting one foot in front of the other. Across the world, Nike's presence felt steady rather than overwhelming. In some places, it was visible in stadiums and training centers. In others, it appeared only briefly. A pair of shoes at sunrise, a jacket pulled on before a late walk, a familiar logo glimpsed without much thought. And that was enough. Nike had learned that meaning does not need repetition to be powerful. It only needs consistency. And so the brand continued to move forward quietly, aligned with the slow, dependable rhythm of human effort. As the years passed, Nike's story began to resemble a long-distance run rather than a sprint. There was no single finish line ahead, only terrain, changing gently beneath steady feet. The company understood now that its greatest strength was not speed, but adaptability, the ability to move with the world as it shifted. Internally, this translated into a culture that valued reflection. Meetings left space for thought. Ideas were tested, rested, and revisited. The most successful innovations were often the simplest, small adjustments that accumulated into meaningful change. Nike had grown comfortable with the idea that progress rarely announces itself loudly. The legacy of its founders remained present but unobtrusive. Phil Knight's belief in patience and long bets still shaped decisions. Bowerman's obsession with the athlete's experience still guided design. These were not rules written down. They were instincts passed quietly from one generation to the next. In this phase of its life, Nike no longer needed to define itself. It simply acted in alignment with what it had always believed. Movement matters, effort matters, showing up matters. Whether on a global stage or a quiet neighborhood street, those truths remained unchanged. And so, Nike continued, not chasing the future, not clinging to the past, but moving calmly through the present, step by step, breath by breath, like a runner who knows the distance is long and who has learned to trust the pace. Over time, Nike's story became less about what it launched and more about what it allowed. It allowed athletes to define success for themselves. It allowed movement to take many forms. It allowed progress to be quiet. This shift was subtle but profound. The company no longer positioned itself at the center of the story. Instead, it stepped slightly to the side, creating space for individuals to find their own meaning in motion. This approach echoed a deeper truth Nike had learned over decades, that people do not move because they are told to. They move because something inside them asks for it, a restlessness, a desire to feel capable, a need to reconnect with their bodies after long stretches of stillness. Nike's role was simply to remove friction from that instinct, to make movement feel more inviting, more forgiving, more human. Products followed this philosophy. Shoes cushioned not just impact, but doubt. Apparel supported not just performance, but comfort. Every curve, every seam, every material choice reflected an understanding that bodies are different from one another and from one day to the next. What worked yesterday might need adjustment tomorrow. Nike embraced that variability. From a business perspective, this meant accepting nuance. Growth did not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looked like retention, like trust, like people returning again and again because the experience felt right. Nike leaned into relationships rather than transactions, knowing that loyalty is built slowly, through consistency. In this way, Nike's evolution mirrored the athlete's journey itself. Early enthusiasm gives way to discipline. Discipline gives way to wisdom. And wisdom teaches when to push and when to ease. The brand settled into this understanding with calm confidence, no longer chasing validation, content to keep moving forward at a pace that could be sustained. Nike's global presence also began to feel more like a network than a spotlight. Instead of projecting a single voice outward, the brand listened inward to regions, cultures, and communities, each with their own relationship to sport. In some places, movement was communal. In others, deeply personal. Nike adjusted accordingly, allowing its expression to shift without losing its core. This adaptability became one of Nike's quiet strengths. The swoosh remained recognizable, but its meaning expanded. It could signal ambition in one context, balance in another, joy in another still. Nike understood that symbols endure not because they are rigid, but because they are flexible enough to hold many stories. The company's leadership embraced this long view. Decisions were guided less by short-term momentum and more by alignment. Was this move additive? Did it respect the athlete? Did it honor the idea of movement as something earned and personal? These questions shaped strategy in ways that were rarely visible from the outside, but deeply felt on the inside. Employees spoke of Nike less as a workplace and more as an environment, one shaped by motion, curiosity, and reflection. Paths encouraged walking. Open spaces encouraged pause. The physical environment mirrored the brand's philosophy. That movement and thought are connected, and that clarity often arrives when the body is engaged. Nike had grown into something rare, a company large enough to influence global culture, yet disciplined enough to resist excess. Its confidence came not from dominance, but from familiarity, from knowing who it was and trusting that identity to carry it forward without force. As Nike entered what might be considered its later chapters, the brand's language softened further. It no longer needed to persuade. It simply needed to remain present, like a steady companion on a long walk, offering support without interruption. This presence was felt most strongly in moments that were never broadcast. Early mornings, late evenings, quiet decisions to move when no one else was watching. Nike's most loyal customers often spoke about the brand without fanfare. They described how shoes felt after months of wear, how apparel aged gracefully, how gear became familiar, dependable, almost invisible. These were not marketing victories. They were relationship markers, proof that Nike had become woven into daily life rather than perched above it. From a strategic standpoint, this kind of loyalty is rare. It cannot be rushed. It cannot be engineered through spectacle alone. It is built through restraint, knowing when not to change, when to let something remain as it is. Nike learned this lesson slowly, through trial, error, and reflection. The company's innovation cycle adjusted accordingly. Some breakthroughs arrived boldly. Others arrived quietly. Many arrived unnoticed, improving experience without demanding attention. Nike came to understand that the best design often disappears into use. When something works perfectly, you stop noticing it. And so Nike continued its journey, not by redefining itself again and again, but by refining what already existed, honing edges, smoothing transitions, Trusting that care, applied consistently over time, produces its own form of excellence. Looking back, it becomes clear that Nike's rise was never a straight climb. It was a series of adjustments, a willingness to listen, a readiness to experiment, a discipline to stay the course even when results were not immediate. These qualities, more than any single product or campaign, shaped the company's trajectory. The early years demanded courage. The middle years demanded ambition. The later years demanded wisdom. Nike met each phase differently, adapting its posture while preserving its core belief. That movement is fundamental to being human. In quiet moments, one can almost trace the arc of the company through the rhythm of a single run, the excitement of starting out, the challenge of finding pace, the temptation to push too hard, the relief of settling in, the satisfaction of continuing, step after step, long after the novelty has faded. Nike's story, in this sense, is not unique. It reflects something universal. Growth that lasts is rarely loud. It is built through repetition, through patience, through showing up even when motivation wavers. And so the brand remains, not fixed, not finished, still moving, still adjusting, still learning, carrying forward the quiet understanding that the journey itself is the point, and that as long as movement continues, the story does too. As Nike settled fully into its long stride, the company's story became less about ambition and more about stewardship. The brand understood that its role was no longer to prove itself, but to care for what it had built. This required restraint. It required listening. It required knowing when not to act. Leadership at Nike often spoke about patience, about allowing ideas to mature before release. In earlier decades, speed had been essential. Now timing mattered more. The right moment carried weight. A thoughtful launch could resonate longer than 10 rushed ones. Nike learned to trust silence as much as sound. This approach extended to how the brand showed up in the world. Advertising became more reflective. Product lines became more focused. Even growth targets were framed in terms of sustainability rather than acceleration. Nike had learned, as many athletes eventually do, that burnout is not a badge of honor. Movement, after all, is something meant to last a lifetime. Nike's mission quietly aligned with this truth. It sought to support people not just at their strongest, but across their entire arc, through youth, adulthood, and aging, through peak fitness and gentle recovery, through ambition and acceptance. In this phase, Nike felt less like a company chasing momentum and more like one maintaining balance. The swoosh no longer symbolized speed alone. It symbolized continuity, a reminder that motion does not need urgency to matter. Nike's influence now lived most powerfully in ordinary moments. A pair of shoes waiting by the door at dawn, a jacket draped over a chair after an evening walk, a quiet choice to move instead of staying still. These moments rarely made headlines, yet they defined the brand's deepest impact. People often describe Nike gear as familiar, reliable, comfortable. These were not glamorous adjectives, but they were meaningful. Familiarity implies trust. Reliability implies care. Comfort implies understanding. Nike had grown into these qualities slowly, through years of attention and refinement. From a business lens, this kind of relationship is invaluable. It cannot be bought. It must be earned. Nike's consistency over decades allowed it to become part of daily routine rather than an occasional indulgence. The brand did not interrupt life, it accompanied it. This companionship extended across generations. Parents passed down old Nike jackets. Runners returned to favorite shoe models year after year. New athletes discovered the brand not through advertising, but through experience. Someone they trusted had worn it before. Nike's story, in this way, became layered. Each generation added its own meaning. The company no longer needed to define success. It simply needed to remain present as people defined it for themselves. At its core, Nike's philosophy had always been simple. Movement matters, effort matters, showing up matters. These ideas never changed, even as the world around them did. What changed was how quietly Nike learned to express them. Early on, belief had to be stated boldly. Later, it could be implied. A well-made shoe said enough. A thoughtful design spoke without words. Nike trusted that people would feel the intention embedded in the work. This trust extended inward as well. Employees were encouraged to think long-term, to consider consequences, to ask not only what could be done, but what should be done. These questions shaped decisions that were rarely visible, yet deeply influential. Nike had become less reactive, more grounded. It understood that leadership is not about constant motion, but about direction. Knowing where you are going allows you to move calmly, even when the path bends, and the path always bends. Markets shift, cultures evolve, technology accelerates. Nike met these changes not with anxiety, but with curiosity. How can movement remain meaningful in this new context? How can effort still feel human? These questions continue to guide the brand, quietly shaping its future without demanding attention. As the story begins to slow, it is worth returning to where it started. A track in Oregon. Early morning air, footsteps echoing softly, a coach watching closely, a runner thinking deeply. The scale was small then. The intention was not. That intention, to help people move better, remains unchanged. It has simply traveled far, across continents, across decades, across millions of lives. Yet it still feels personal. A single step, a single choice. Nike's journey teaches something gentle but profound. That growth does not require noise. That success does not require constant validation. That the most enduring impact often arrives quietly, through repetition and care. Like a long run completed without drama. No crowd, no applause. Just the satisfaction of having moved, of having stayed with the effort from start to finish. Nike did not become what it is by sprinting endlessly. It learned to pace itself, to breathe, to listen, to keep going without rushing. In doing so, it mirrored the very experience it sought to support. And now, as the story eases toward rest, there is a sense of calm completion, not an ending, but a pause. Tonight, as the world grows quieter, Nike's story settles gently alongside you, not as a lesson, not as a command, simply as a reminder that movement, in any form, is enough. You do not need to win. You do not need to improve. You do not need to prove anything. Sometimes it is enough to move gently through your day, to breathe, to rest. The same patience that carried a small idea into a global presence can carry you through whatever lies ahead. One step, one breath, one quiet decision at a time. The lights dim, the track empties. The shoes by the door wait patiently for another day. There is no urgency now, only stillness. The story slows, the world softens. Good night.